Welcome to the Dynamics of Everyday Life, where we demystify some tricky concepts and get to know ourselves a little bit better. Welcome back to the Dynamics of Everyday Life. Today I'm following on from last week's episode where we met Diane and talked about why she might not be looking up. After considering why Diane might be avoiding looking in certain places, it got me thinking about whether we really know what we're looking for, and do we need to? How much of this is helpful, and how much of this is a distraction? A few years ago, it was incredibly trendy in popular psychology to talk about finding your purpose. There were lots of articles written about it, and the concept was all over social media. However, I remember that a couple of my coaching clients found this quite challenging, as they didn't know what their purpose was. They tried all the quizzes that abounded on social media. You know the type of thing. 5 questions that will help you find your purpose, or tell you what kind of cheesecake you'd be. But nothing was coming up for them, and it started to make them feel like less of a person. I frequently heard the phrase, "What's wrong with me if I can't find my purpose?" Having purpose was supposed to help you feel empowered and motivated, and this was having completely the opposite effect. So what's going on here? First of all, let's get rid of the zeitgeist aspect. It was what was being talked about at the time. Someone got hold of it as a concept and decided to run with it. It gave rise to a few articles and books, and now we've moved on to talking about our why. But we can have more than one why, and I'd argue that we should. For example, why do I feed and care for my children? Because I want them to thrive. Why do I do my podcast? Because I want to share the knowledge with people that I think can be seen as too academic or elitist and make it understandable so that we can all make better choices and lead happier lives. Why do I seek more training and learning opportunities? Because I never want to stop growing and learning. The word why in itself can be problematic too. It can bring up all kinds of things for people. When someone asks me why, I'll often have an immediate wish to say, why not? I feel judged and as if I have to defend myself and my choices, which from a neuroscientific point of view isn't great. My amygdala gets hijacked and I can't access the bit in my brain, the prefrontal cortex, where all the lovely juicy creative thinking gets done. But I'm not a neuroscientist, so let's not fall down that particular rabbit hole, as I'm not exactly sure how I'll get out. If we only have one purpose, then if that becomes less relevant to us, it can shake our foundations. As a tangent, it's one reason that having a portfolio career today can be a smart move. I'll never forget the picture I saw years ago in the news of an investment banker throwing himself out of a window at the height of the financial crisis. It's not easy to know who we are or what we do if the one thing that we've focused on for years is no longer part of our lives. Fast forward 15, 20 years and it's becoming increasingly popular to do more than one thing. And we love a bit of variety. It's good for us. There are several different theories of needs that state that whilst we love a bit of certainty, we do need some uncertainty too. As human beings, we have several things that we're good at, and we will vary what we're focusing on over time. So having more than one reason for our choices can give us more of a grounding. It can help us feel more secure. Let's have a think about what psychodynamics says here. I'm going to start with identification. Identification from a psychodynamic standpoint does not mean the establishing of your own identity. Psychodynamic theorists explain identification as either extending your identity into someone else, borrowing your identity from someone else, or mixing up your identity with someone else. We could start tying ourselves up in knots here, but that's exactly what I don't want to do. Let's simplify things. The process of identification, particularly in the last 2 points, is the confusion of who you are with someone else. We can all remember what it was like to be a teenager, when we really didn't know who we were, despite desperately trying to tell the outside world that we did. What we do at this point, and at other stages in our lives when we're feeling uncertain, is to get some form of grounding by merging ourselves with another, to get a sense of belonging, again, another primal need. Whilst this might give us temporary relief, what actually happens is that we feel less secure because it's unclear to us where the other person stops and we begin. And if we don't know who we are, then it becomes incredibly difficult to work out what our whys are. We don't know if they're our whys or if they're the other person's. I'm sure you can think of occasions when you were growing up when you liked something because someone that you admired did. This can be incredibly flattering and also a bit frustrating. I know that imitation is supposed to be the most sincere form of flattery, but there's also something a bit unnerving about it too. This can also be linked to idealisation and is another tick on our defence mechanism bingo card. Freud describes the process in his 1914 work on narcissism as one where the object or person is lifted up and viewed in a purely positive light. All negative aspects of the object fall away. For Freud, this was heavily linked to narcissism, as all the positive aspects that someone was projecting into the object were actually a reflection of what the person felt about themselves, completely obliterating any negative thoughts. And this is where the defensive aspects come in, because the negative thoughts are what can cause us anxiety, which is what we want to avoid at all costs. If we're idealising, we're then not able to see the whole part of ourselves, and it's often the side of ourselves that we struggle with which will lead us to our whys. One of the reasons that I do my podcast is because I've often struggled with not feeling clever or academic enough, and I don't like feeling that way. So I want to help other people not feel that way by explaining tricky concepts so we can all gain from this wisdom, not for it to be inaccessible, and hopefully be happier in our lives. Moving along our bingo card, we can also find displacement and sublimation. A quick recap on these, as it's been a while since we talked about these particular defence mechanisms. Displacement is an unconscious process where we push out difficult feelings from one object or person onto another. It's where we kick the cat, or come home and shout at our family because work has been challenging. We don't take out our frustrations on the appropriate object because the ramifications of that would cause us too much anxiety. The cat, once kicked, might slope off behind the sofa, but it's not going to give us a sack. Sublimation, on the other hand, is where we put our unconscious feelings that are socially unacceptable, such as rage, anger and violence, into activities that are not frowned upon by society. An example here would be that instead of going home and kicking the cat or shouting at your partner after having had a challenging day, what you'd do instead is to go to the gym and punch a boxing bag or go on the treadmill for 2 hours. By moving on the feelings, we aren't actually looking at them or exploring what data they could be giving us. It means that we have no chance to go deeper as to what might actually be driving us. Which brings us to our good friend denial. Denial is where we refuse to accept something to be true, despite there being overwhelming evidence to support this. Think Buzz Lightyear in Toy Story, who is absolutely convinced he's a space ranger, even though he sat on a child's bed next to a cowboy, Little Bo Peep and a dinosaur. When we deny something, we're refusing to allow it into our world and our existence because it's too difficult and too painful for us to do this. But what I'm wondering here is, if we're denying something to ourselves, are we actually cutting ourselves off from thinking about what our whys might be? Are our whys a bit scary for us? What would it mean for us to look at them? What might we have to accept about ourselves? I've realised that in talking about these defence mechanisms, it might have come across that defence mechanisms are a bad thing, and that's not what I'm meaning at all. Defence mechanisms exist for a very good reason, to keep us safe. What they might be doing, though, is they might be keeping us from finding out more about ourselves and what we might want out of life. It's okay to want more than one thing from life. I'm not sure where the person with the clipboard and the high-vis jacket is, saying that we can only have one purpose or one why. I wonder whether it's because we see so many people that we perceive to be successful as being focused on one thing, that we feel that without our one thing, we're less of a person. But that's just not true. My invitation for you this week is for you to consider where in your life you might be defending yourself against thinking about some other whys. These don't have to be grand or lofty ideals. They're as unique and individual as we all are. No one should be telling you that your whys aren't good enough or aren't correct. No one has that power over you. Although we use the word why, this is not something that needs to be justified. Have as many whys as you want, and change them whenever you want to. Looking at ourselves at this level can be challenging and unnerving as we develop our awareness, so I'd always encourage that you do this at your own speed. If you feel you need some extra help around this, then I've put together a PDF resource sheet and you can find the link for this in the show notes. Thanks for listening to this episode of The Dynamics of Everyday Life. Please hit the follow button for future episodes and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. You can follow me on Instagram at The Dynamics of Everyday Life or find me on LinkedIn at Julia Rogers. I'd love to hear from you and hear your thoughts on dynamics. The Dynamics of Everyday Life is brought to you by Coaching 42 and the fabulous team at the Podcast Boutique.